I never imagined the moment I would realize I was truly alone would come in a hospital room, under flickering fluorescent lights, with a nurse asking me a question I didn't know how to answer. Who will be taking care of your children while you're in surgery? I opened my mouth, confident at first. My parents lived only 20 minutes away. They were retired, comfortable, and always talked about how much they loved their grandchildren. This was supposed to be simple. But as I stood there, phone in hand, my confidence quietly dissolved. Because I already knew the answer. Still, I dialed. My name is David. I'm a single father of twins, Ethan and Lily, both 3 years old at the time. They were my entire world. Every decision I made revolved around them. Every sacrifice felt worth it the moment they laughed or reached for my hand or fell asleep on my chest after a long day. Their mother had left shortly after they were born. No dramatic argument, no big explosion, just a slow withdrawal until one day she was gone. I didn't chase her. I didn't beg. I focused on what mattered, my kids. Life became a carefully balanced routine. Work, daycare, groceries, bedtime stories, exhaustion. I learned to function on very little sleep and a lot of responsibility. Some days were overwhelming, but I never felt sorry for myself. Until my body gave out. It started with sharp pains that I ignored longer than I should have. Like most parents, I convinced myself I could push through it. There was always something more important. Another bill, another deadline, another night of calming nightmares. When I finally collapsed at work, I had no choice but to face reality. I needed surgery. Not optional, not when you have time, necessary. The doctors explained everything calmly. The risks, the recovery time, the fact that I wouldn't be able to lift my children for weeks, that I would need help. That word help sat heavy in my chest, because asking for help had never gone well in my family. Growing up, my parents valued independence above all else, or at least they valued their comfort over inconvenience. They loved me in their own way, but love was always conditional, quiet, controlled, never messy. When I told them about the surgery, there was a pause on the line. "How long will it take?" my mother asked. "A few hours," I said. "Recovery will be a few weeks." "And the kids," my father added. "That's why I'm calling," I replied. "I need someone to watch Ethan and Lily during the surgery, just for a couple of days, maybe 3. Another pause. Longer this time. My mother sighed, not with concern, with irritation. "David, we weren't really planning on doing childcare again. We've gotten used to our routine." I blinked, confused. "It's temporary. I don't have anyone else." "Well, have you looked into a sitter or maybe a facility?" "A facility," I repeated. "They're 3." My mother clicked her tongue. "You should have planned better. We're not as young as we used to be. It's a lot of work." I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture. "I'm having surgery," I said. "I'll be unconscious." "And we understand that," she replied quickly. "But we also deserve our peace." Peace. That was the word they chose. Not concern, not family, not responsibility. Peace. They told me they would check their schedule. They didn't call back. The hospital didn't wait. In the end, a coworker I barely knew stepped in. A woman named Maria, who had kids of her own and saw the panic I was trying to hide. She rearranged her life without hesitation. Picked my twins up, packed extra clothes, memorized bedtime routines. Strangers showed up. Family did not. The surgery went well, technically, but recovery was brutal. Pain mixed with exhaustion. Guilt layered on top. I hated needing help, hated feeling weak, hated knowing my children were being cared for by someone who wasn't supposed to have to. My parents visited once. Once. They stood at the foot of the bed commenting on how pale I looked, how hospitals made them uncomfortable, how traffic was bad that day. They didn't ask about the twins. They didn't stay long. As they left, my mother smiled and said, "You'll bounce back. You always do." And that's when I understood something that would take me years to fully process. To them, my struggle was an inconvenience. To me, it was survival. Lying there alone after they left, I stared at the ceiling and made a quiet decision. One I didn't fully understand yet, but felt deep in my bones. If my parents could choose comfort over my children, then I would choose something else. Something new. Something real. something that didn't disappear when things got hard. That was the beginning. Recovery was supposed to be the easy part. That's what the doctor said anyway. The surgery went well, they told me. Now you just need rest. What they didn't explain was how loud rest can be when you're alone with your thoughts. The first few days after I returned home were a blur of pain medication, shallow sleep, and the constant ache of wanting to reach for my children and being physically unable to. Every instinct in my body screamed to pick them up, to carry them, to prove to myself that everything was still okay. But nothing felt okay. Maria brought Ethan and Lily back on the fourth day. They ran toward me the moment they saw me sitting on the couch, arms outstretched, but they stopped short when Maria gently reminded them. "Daddy can't lift you right now," she said softly. The confusion on their faces hurt more than the surgery ever could. Lily tilted her head. "Did we do something bad?" "No," I said quickly, my voice cracking despite my best effort. "Daddy's just healing." They accepted it in the way children do, not fully understanding, but trusting anyway. They climbed onto the couch beside me, careful and quiet, as if I were made of glass. That trust nearly broke me. Maria stayed longer than she planned. She helped with meals, tidied up without being asked, and kept an eye on me when the pain made my hands shake. She never made me feel like a burden, never sighed, never looked at the clock. At one point, I apologized. She laughed gently. "David, you'd do the same for me." I wasn't so sure, because the people who were supposed to do the same hadn't. My parents called once during that first week. "How's the recovery?" my father asked. "Slow," I said. "The kids are back home." "That's good," my mother replied. "Less disruption." Disruption. Not stress, not fear. Disruption. They didn't offer to visit, didn't ask if the twins were scared or confused or struggling with the sudden change. They had already mentally closed the chapter, and for the first time in my life, I started doing the same. As weeks passed, I noticed something uncomfortable. I felt lighter when I didn't hear from them, less anxious, less like I was waiting to fail some invisible test I didn't remember signing up for. I began to see patterns I had ignored for years. Growing up, my parents had always been there, but only when it was convenient. They showed up to school events but left early. They offered advice but withheld support. Praise was rare. Criticism was subtle but constant. You could have done better. That was good, but don't get too confident. You don't want to overreach. When my twins were born, I thought things might change. I thought grandchildren would soften them. Instead, it just gave them something new to admire from a distance. They liked pictures, updates, short visits that ended before bedtime. They liked being grandparents without being involved. And now, when involvement mattered most, they chose comfort. The realization didn't come with anger. It came with exhaustion. One night, after putting Ethan and Lily to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of unpaid bills. Medical costs, missed work, the quiet consequences of having no safety net. I realized something frightening. If something happened to me again, there was no one. Not really. That night, I started making changes. Small ones at first. I accepted help without apologizing. Maria introduced me to other parents from her circle, people who understood chaos, exhaustion, and the unspoken fear of failing the tiny humans who depended on you. Playdates turned into shared meals. Shared meals turned into conversations that didn't revolve around appearances or expectations. No one asked why my parents weren't around. No one judged. They just showed up. Ethan started calling Maria Auntie without anyone suggesting it. Lily reached for her hand instinctively, and instead of feeling replaced, I felt relieved. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Meanwhile, my parents grew distant in a way that was almost strategic. Holidays were busy. Calls were short. Invitations vague. They noticed the shift. Of course they did. One afternoon, my mother finally said it out loud. "You seem distant lately." I took a breath. "I've been busy." "With what?" she asked. "With raising my kids." Silence. "I just mean," she continued carefully, "we don't see you as much." I almost laughed. "You didn't see us when we needed you either." She didn't respond right away. When she did, her tone hardened. "That's unfair." "No," I said calmly. "It's accurate." That was the first boundary I ever set with them. And once I said it, I realized how overdue it was. They didn't apologize. They refrained. They minimized. They explained how hard things were for them. I listened politely, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I stopped hoping they would change. And in doing so, I stopped being disappointed. Months passed. My strength returned slowly. I went back to work part-time. The twins adapted. Life found a new rhythm, one built on consistency, not obligation. My parents existed on the periphery now. Occasional texts, carefully neutral conversations. They were no longer my backup plan. They were just people I happened to be related to. And then, one evening, everything changed again. A letter arrived. Official, serious, unexpected. It was from a lawyer, and it forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. My parents weren't just choosing comfort, they were preparing to protect it, even if it meant cutting us out entirely. The letter sat unopened for a kitchen counter for nearly an hour. I already knew it wasn't good news. Lawyer envelopes have a weight to them, not physical, but emotional. They arrive carrying decisions made without you, consequences designed elsewhere, and words carefully chosen to sound reasonable while changing everything. When I finally opened it, Ethan and Lily were coloring at the table beside me. I didn't want them to see my face. The letter was polite, clinical, almost gentle. It informed me that my parents were revising their estate plans, that certain financial arrangements previously discussed informally would no longer apply, that they had chosen to simplify future responsibilities and limit long-term obligations. No names mentioned, no accusations, just exclusion. I read it twice before it fully landed. They weren't angry, they weren't reacting, they were protecting themselves. And suddenly, every conversation from the past year made sense. The distance, the neutrality, the way they avoided specifics when the future came up. This wasn't punishment, it was preparation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I got up and helped Lily clean the blue marker she'd somehow managed to smear across her cheek. "Daddy," she said, looking up at me, "are you sad?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart, just thinking." That night, after the twins were asleep, I sat alone on the couch in the quiet dark. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmed. For years, I had told myself that my parents loved me in their own way, that they simply struggled with emotional availability, that when things really mattered, they would show up. Now I understood the truth. They showed up only when it cost them nothing. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I made a decision. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I stopped waiting. I met with a financial advisor, then a lawyer of my own. I reviewed guardianship plans, insurance policies, emergency contacts. I wrote names down, not based on blood, but based on behavior. Maria was one of them. So were two other parents in our circle, people who had fed my children, babysat without being asked, checked in when I was exhausted without needing an invitation. People who showed up when it wasn't convenient. I didn't inform my parents of these changes. I didn't need to. The shift was internal and irreversible. Weeks later, my father called. It had been long enough that the sound of his voice surprised me. "We got your message," he said. "What message?" I asked. "The one about not attending the holidays this year." "Oh," I replied calmly. "Yes." He hesitated. "Is something wrong?" I almost laughed at the question. "No," I said. "Something's finally right." There was a pause. A long one. "We're your family," he said finally. I took a breath. Family shows up. Silence again. Then, quietly, "You're overreacting." That sentence sealed it. I don't think so. I think I just stopped pretending. I wished him well and ended the call. Afterward, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. The holidays came and went without drama. No guilt-filled dinners, no tense conversations, just warmth, noise, laughter, and children falling asleep on couches that weren't theirs, surrounded by people who loved them without obligation. Ethan asked one night, "Why don't we go to Grandma and Grandpa's house anymore?" I considered lying. Instead, I chose honesty. Gently. "Sometimes," I said, "people don't know how to take care of others the way they should." He nodded thoughtfully. "Like when I forgot to share my toy?" I smiled. "Kind of like that." "And you helped me learn," he said. "Yes," I replied softly. "That's what family does." That's when I realized something profound. I wasn't taking anything away from my parents. They were losing access, because access is earned. Months later, my mother reached out. Her message was cautious, measured. "I've been thinking a lot. Maybe we should talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. In the past, I would have jumped at the opportunity, hoped for a breakthrough, a realization, an apology. Now, I ask myself one question. Would this conversation help my children? The answer was no. So I replied politely, "I wish you well. I'm focused on building stability for my kids." She didn't respond, and that was okay. Life moved forward, steadily, quietly. My children thrived. They grew confident, secure, not afraid to ask for help or express emotion. They watched adults around them treat each other with kindness and accountability. They learned what healthy relationships look like, not because I lectured them, but because I chose better examples. And slowly, without realizing it, I became the parent I had needed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who chose comfort lost connection. The people who chose effort gained family. And one day, years later, when my parents realized what they had missed, it wouldn't be because I told them, it would be because my children no longer knew them. Not out of revenge, but out of reality. Years passed. The surgery, the betrayal, the painful clarity. It all became a distant memory. Not forgotten, but transformed into lessons, quiet victories, and invisible boundaries. Ethan and Lily were now 7, old enough to understand more of the world, and wise beyond their years in ways that made me proud. They didn't carry resentment toward their grandparents. They simply knew who was there for them, who consistently showed up, and who made them feel safe. My parents, of course, noticed the distance. They began to make tentative attempts, short phone calls that started with, "We missed the kids," and ended with, "Call us if you want." I read each message calmly, weighing my response, knowing that every word mattered. I didn't ignore them to be cruel. I ignored them to protect my children. It was a lesson I had learned early. People like my parents only respected boundaries when those boundaries were enforced firmly. One Saturday, my mother called again. "David, we'd like to take the kids to the park tomorrow," she said. I listened carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you for the offer," I replied. "We have plans tomorrow." "Oh, come on," she urged. "They'll love it. We'll have ice cream. It'll get fun." I felt a familiar pull. Guilt, obligation, the old instinct to prove myself. But it didn't take. "No," I said gently. "We're spending the day with people who are a consistent presence in their lives." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. We just want to be part of their lives," she said, almost pleading. "And you could have," I answered calmly, "but you chose comfort over consistency when it mattered most." Click. The line went dead. I hung up and felt nothing. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about anger. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It wasn't even about proving them wrong. Revenge was about creating a life so full, so stable, and so full of love that their absence didn't matter. That their choice to prioritize themselves over my children didn't harm anyone I cared about. And I had done that. The twins flourished. Ethan became a curious, thoughtful boy with a passion for building things. Lily developed an empathy that stunned even me, often comforting other children and adults without being asked. They were the product of patience, care, and boundaries, things my parents could never give. Over time, the people who had stepped in during my darkest moments became more than temporary helpers. They became family. Maria, who had first cared for the twins during my recovery, moved closer, became an active part of our lives, and even helped me with small parenting decisions. Two other friends, reliable and kind, became godparents, guardians in the event anything ever happened to me. This network, built quietly over years, formed a fortress of love, stability, and accountability. Meanwhile, my parents' sporadic attempts to enter the twins' lives became increasingly awkward. They tried gifts, outings, and even bribes, expensive toys, vacations, promises, but the twins' response was always the same: polite but distant. "Why don't we just stay with Aunt Maria today?" Lily would ask, shrugging. Or Ethan would reply, "We're already going to the park with people who actually help us." And I didn't need to coach them. They had learned by example. One evening, my father tried one last tactic. "David, the kids are old enough to decide who they want to spend time with. Don't you think you should let them choose?" I leaned back in my chair, watching Ethan build a Lego castle on the floor while Lily painted. I could see it in their faces: joy, curiosity, and confidence in the people around them. "No," I said calmly. "I've already let them choose every day of their lives. They chose consistency, reliability, and love, and that's what they'll always have." There was a long pause, then a quiet, almost defeated, "I see." That day, I realized something that had been growing inside me for years. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't require confrontation or exposure. Revenge is quiet. It is building a life so strong, so full, and so unshakable that those who once underestimated you can only watch from the sidelines. And as I looked at my children laughing, playing, and thriving, I understood it completely. I had chosen a new family, one that would never abandon us. My parents chose comfort, and I had chosen better. It had been nearly a decade since my twins were born. The surgery, the absence of my parents, the quiet betrayals, and the long nights of worry felt like a different lifetime. The twins were now 9 years old enough to notice patterns, but young enough to still be shaped by love and example. Our home was filled with laughter, curiosity, and calm chaos. Every corner held a memory: Lego towers Ethan had built, paintings Lily had made, small notes of love and humor tucked into backpacks or lunchboxes. And everywhere I looked, I saw family. Not the family I was born into, but the family I had chosen: loyal, loving, consistent, and present. Maria, who had been a lifeline after my surgery, now played an irreplaceable role. She helped with homework, celebrated birthdays, and disciplined when necessary. Two other friends who had stepped in quietly over the years had become godparents, guardians in every sense, pillars of support without expectation. The people who had shown up earned the right to be called family. Then one Sunday afternoon, a message appeared on my phone. It was from my mother. "David, we'd like to see the kids, please." I stared at it for a long moment. My finger hovered over the reply. I could have said yes. I could have agreed to a visit, to let them reconnect under my watchful eye. I could have given them a chance to redeem themselves. But I didn't. Instead, I typed, "I'm focused on building a life for my children where they feel safe and loved. That's not negotiable. Please respect our boundaries." I pressed send. Silence followed. That evening, I watched Ethan show Lily how to make a paper airplane. She laughed, the folds precise but imperfect. He cheered. Maria smiled in the background. The two godparents stopped by for dinner, dropping off freshly baked cookies and stories about their day. And I realized something profound. My revenge wasn't anger, punishment, or confrontation. It was freedom. Freedom from waiting for recognition. Freedom from disappointment. Freedom from people who only cared when it was convenient. My parents' absence no longer left a hole. My children had love in abundance, lessons in empathy, consistency, and courage. They were thriving because I had chosen the people who actually mattered. That evening, as I tucked Ethan and Lily into bed, I held them a little longer than usual. They pressed their tiny hands against mine, their eyes heavy with sleep. "I love you, Daddy," Lily whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied. Ethan grinned. "Thanks for always being here, Dad." And in that moment, I understood fully what revenge had become. It wasn't about proving my parents wrong. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It wasn't even about showing the world I had succeeded despite them. It was about building a life so strong, so full, and so unshakable that their choices no longer had power over me. I had lost their love when I needed it most. So I created my own. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all. Not loud, not dramatic, not vindictive. Quiet, complete, irrefutable. The kind that lasts a lifetime. Because family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice. Sometimes it's courage. Sometimes it's the quiet triumph of showing up when others walk away. And as I turned off the lights and closed the door to my children's room, I smiled. I had chosen better. And that was all the revenge I would ever need.